All right, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm talking to Kyle and Ariel.
Doing
Kyle,
good. Glad to be
Ariel, how
here.
are you
Doing good, Raul. Great to be here and looking forward to the conversation today, especially because I already know that this conversation we're about to have is one that many people want to have, but maybe haven't had the opportunity to have in a very long time.
Yeah, and it's fun. It's been a long time since I've had maybe like 100 episodes since I've had two people on the other side of
Oh,
the,
nice.
the
Happy to
mic,
be
so it's
those
gonna be
people.
fun. Yeah, here we are. Well, for everyone listening, though, could you give us a quick bio, background on what you're working on, who you are, and why
Yeah, you want to take
why
that?
you're on the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife and I have both been entrepreneurs as long as we've been together, which is about 10 years.
Yeah.
And you know how in a lot of marriages, you go into what they call the honeymoon phase? You know what I'm talking about? We actually experience the opposite of that.
Yeah.
We experience what we call the anti-honeymoon phase, where since both of us were entrepreneurs, we had to learn very early on what it was actually like to navigate being both a romantic couple and a couple in business. We both had separate businesses, and we had to figure out the things that nobody else was talking about. We had to figure out, like, how do we actually be romantic partners instead of just roommates that so happen to be married while we're growing businesses. We had to figure out how to have tasks and roles and leverage each other's strengths and just really do the things that nobody else was talking about. And this actually created the hardest time of our entire relationship.
Yeah. Specifically, we went into now what we call the anti-honeymoon stage, which is where we, as our schedules filled up, our intimacy went down and our income, quite honestly, flatlined because we were so busy and we weren't able to focus on the things that actually grew the business because we were busy kind of fighting the battles on the personal side while also trying to just sustain the growth we were having without sacrificing in our relationship, in our family, or even in our health.
Yeah. And it created a power struggle too. I'm sure many listeners can relate. When you are two driven people, or at least in a relationship with somebody who is very driven in business, it can create a power dynamic where we don't really know the answer to the question, where do we fit in and how do we actually come together and create a unified life that we both could be excited about? And since nobody was talking about it, we just had to create it for ourselves. I remember being in a guest room of our house, just praying out to God for an answer. And I realized in that moment, coming out of that prayer, that Ariel and I were brought together for a reason. We were brought together and married for a reason, but we were also brought together in business for a reason. And we didn't want to sacrifice one for the other. But we realized in that moment, okay, we actually need to change the way that we operate our business. We needed to change the way we relate to each other. And we need to change the way that we schedule our time to actually prioritize the relationship and the business in a way that makes both of them work symbiotically together. So as a result of that, we created a completely different path and just tried some things out. Over time, everything changed for us. We were flatlined in our business, but once we actually figured out how to master being couplepreneurs, as we call it, two entrepreneurs in one relationship, our income nearly 3x'd, and we started going on more date nights than ever. And Raul, when you go on a date night and if you don't post about it, it didn't really happen. No, well,
Tell me about that.
It's like cold plunging or like doing fitness competitions. You're going to know everybody that does it because they post about it. That's what we were doing too. Like we were posting photos and people kept asking us, how do you guys do it? How do you guys actually grow businesses to the point where we were helping companies scale by over $77 million? They're like, how in the world do you do that? And we just started sharing like what we did. And now fast forward many years later, we help couples from all over the world grow and scale businesses without sacrificing the relationship with each other.
That's pretty fascinating. It was interesting that you mentioned that you changed the way that you approach the work versus, because I know that like the interpersonal has to change, the home relationship has to change, like that's obvious, but that the business also had to change. I'm pretty curious about that. But before we dive into that, I have to ask, who runs the home project management system? Who takes out the trash? I'm pretty sure that's in one of your spreadsheets.
It's a good question. So it is pretty equally divided, I would say. And we really divide tasks in an interesting way. We may get into it a little bit more.
I have a home project management system.
To be fair,
that's the
no, we don't have a home project management system. We do have a home manager, though, that is neither of us. So one of the things that we teach our the couples who are growing businesses is that if you can pay somebody $15 an hour to take care of that kind of stuff for you, that frees you up to do the things that are worth $200, $400, even $1,000 to $2,000 an hour.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's the food, the taking care, and for childcare too. You have some clients that are having specific and really cool ways to solve that opportunity
100%
for childcare. Well, let's dive in. So what's the arc of becoming a successful couplepreneur, and how do you define the success? It's not just financial and romantic. What are the things that you can define right now? Life sucks, but here, this is like how we're actually defining what it means. Is it, do you measure it by date nights? Do you measure it by business growth? Do you just measure it by like how you feel throughout the week or more intimate conversations? What's the
I love this
what's that
question.
like?
I'll give my perspective and I would love to hear yours too, Ariel.
Absolutely.
I love this question because in my personal opinion, we have at a very early age accomplished financial dreams that we thought were impossible. In our early 20s, we were making more money together than our parents combined. And we realized right then that I don't think success is defined by money. Yes,
No.
to some degree, it can be like a measuring stick. But for me, really, what I've learned over the years is that success could be defined by, am I doing the thing that ultimately I feel called to do? Now, called could also be like a semantically overloaded word, but essentially I believe that I was created for a purpose, and talking to God and praying to him is what gives me the sense of, okay, this is where I want my life to be. In this fullest expression is who I'm meant to be. And if I'm living every single day in congruence with who I'm meant to be and doing the things that I'm called to do, that is a successful life.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think it's also defining what it looks like, specifically as we're talking to like couplepreneurs here, defining what that looks like together as a couple, right?
Yeah.
Because that measurement of success is going to be very different from one couple as compared to another. And so that's why one of the first things that we do when we do work with couples is like, what is your individual measurement of success as an individual for both people? And then where do those things overlap? And how can we actually create a unified vision together that you guys can both co-create together in a way that's going to financially as well as otherwise incentivize you to actually move in that direction?
100%.
How do you have those conversations? Because like there could be like when you were brewing that, you faced this situation because you were in it. But how do you advise couples, or if it's one person with a business and someone else is either wanting to join the business or do part-time or do fractional work in the beginning, which I'm seeing as a trend right now? How do you have those like hard conversations?
Yeah, for me specifically, the biggest thing that changed the game for Ariel and myself, as well as for many of the clients and couples that we've had the opportunity to coach, is really coming together to create what we call a unified vision for the home. And a unified vision does not mean a uniform vision where you sacrifice your unique individual desires. Basically, a unified vision is coming together with your significant other and answering this question: how can we both get what we both want?
Yeah.
So specifically for the clients that we work with, the biggest radical shift in allowing them to create a unified vision is to go on what we call a vision date. A vision date is basically a time where they go to a specific location and they work through 3 specific things that come together to create a unified vision. Those 3 things are, what are our individual and shared values? So if she values one thing and I value another, that's great. But what are the things that we share together?
Yeah.
Like integrity, freedom, creating things that make an impact. Those are things that we value. And if we build off of the foundation of our values, we're creating something that we find valuable. That's the first question. The second question to answer on the vision date would be, what does our ideal lifestyle look like?
Yeah.
Where do we live? How often do we work? What does our team look like? What type of lifestyle do we get to enjoy with friends in our community? How much time do we have to ourselves? How much time do we have with family? All of that goes into our ideal lifestyle, which leads to step 3 on the vision date, which is, how much money does it actually take to fund that ideal lifestyle?
Yeah.
We believe that the business should fund the lifestyle, not your business should not be dictated by your lifestyle. So what we do is we calculate a magic number that dictates how much revenue a business needs to generate in order to fund that ideal lifestyle. And when couples come together on this, they go from either having no vision, where they're just operating day to day and they don't see a way out, or division, which is like when they have 2 different visions, which creates division in the household, to coming together and creating a unified vision that aligns them on their path and actually allows them to create the life they both find successful.
One thing I'll add to that too is, especially for entrepreneurial people, we have the opportunity to use that entrepreneurial gift of being resourceful and seeing solutions that are maybe outside of the norm that other people may see. So when we see 2 people that maybe have 2 individual visions, getting to bring those visions together, usually we can find a way that's, hey, if I want this and what you want feels a little bit conflicting with that, how can we both get what we want? And how can we use that entrepreneurial gift of being resourceful to make sure that we're both getting what we want versus feeling like we have to sacrifice in the process?
Yeah, I agree. That exercise sounds very powerful and ideal. That sounded a lot like 90% of our marriage prep, to be honest with you. But the last question I think was pretty interesting. And plus, you evolve as you grow. So having these conversations, maybe a year and a half in, 2 years in, 3 years in, makes a lot of sense as you, as a person, evolve. Have you worked with couples where one's more entrepreneurial, the other was not? Like, how do you balance that? Because sometimes I feel like the moment of the excitement of like that third question, okay, cool, we want to do this. We have the shared values. You're executing. We want to grow to this. Our family's being taken care of. This is how we have childcare or whatever taken care of. And we want to do these interesting, fun lifestyle things. Here's how much money's going to take. that's exciting. But then when real life comes, punch in the face. How do you help? Hey, maybe this might not make sense for you to work together.
So there's different layers to that question. There are times where people will get on a call to talk with us, for example, and it's one very strong entrepreneurial person who has a desire for their spouse to join them alongside them.
Yes.
And sometimes our answer to making that work is to not make it work. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but there are times where if the individual who their one spouse is trying to bring into the entrepreneur conversation doesn't want to be an entrepreneur, that's actually a false expectation that's put on that other person. And that happens sometimes. Now, of course, we also work with clients who they maybe both partners share an entrepreneurial, at least drive or at least excitement or aspiration. Exactly. In those particular cases, it's a little bit easier to navigate because there's definitely still hope on the other end. And what that looks like is just the one person who's already in business becoming laser focused on exactly what they want their business relationship to look like and their personal relationship to look like. And if they can get clear on both of those things, then when they're able to bring in their significant other, they're bringing them in with already strong respect for who they are as an individual and could help them rise and leverage their giftedness within the business without sacrificing the relationship in the process.
Yeah. One pitfall, I guess I would say that sometimes we do see is where if there is some relationship tension that already exists, a lot of the times one person feels like going into business together will fix that relationship tension. That it'll bring that it'll bring them together in some way, shape, or form. But as you just said, oftentimes what happens is it actually gets exacerbated because the pressure of business is sometimes going to be the thing that cracks the already shaky foundation.
Yes.
And so what we usually look for when we do have that scenario where one person is entrepreneurial, the other person wants to come into the business, or that's just the vision that they have, is that relationship already pretty solid? And how can we build upon that in a way that creates a business that's unshakable?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, shared suffering is usually more fun with workout groups than it is with your spouse in business. So now it's interesting. You mentioned that some of the things change in the business. And I hear where you alluded to, if you have a vision and now you're more empowered to drive towards that vision, you're going to change the way that you show up to it. But what are some of the practical habits that successful couple entrepreneurs have to have or couplepreneurs have to have in their home life and in their business life?
Yeah. So I would start with two of the things that we really like to put in place with couples that we work with is two different types of meetings. So the first meeting is what we call like a weekly strategy meeting or a weekly priorities meeting. That meeting is really designed to determine what are the priorities for the week, both on the business side as well as on the relationship and the household side. So that looks like what is coming down the pipeline this week? How are we both involved in contributing to that? Are we both needed together? Are we both needed, or are we both doing things separately? And how can we basically predict what's going to happen so we can align on that beforehand versus being in reactive mode, which is what a lot of people do. So that's like the first type of meeting. The second type of meeting is based off of that, which we call a daily check-in meeting. A daily check-in meeting is a really quick, just like 5 to 15 minute checkpoint where it's, okay, this is what we determined was happening today based on our calendar. Is this still accurate? Did anything else come up? Did any dominoes happen that we need to adjust slightly? And that allows them to stay not only aligned for the week and be more proactive versus reactive, but it also allows them to then touch base every single day and get support in certain areas. If something shifted, maybe one person needs to have the other person do this new task that popped up. So it's a really easy way for people to stay aligned and to make sure that everything is happening in a seamless way versus just being reactive to everything.
And Raul, to your question as well, what Ariel just said is those are great things to do on a weekly and daily basis. And I will say, even from a strategic level, the way that couples approach building businesses together is different than just one person. Because like we talked about at the beginning, you have to first be aligned on the vision that the business is creating in the first place. And we have a fun thing that we say in business with entrepreneur couples, which is vision, goals, strategy, roles. If those things are all aligned in that exact sequential order, that's how couples can grow businesses sometimes 3 times faster than the average entrepreneur because they can align on these things. So if you're aligned on the vision, that's great. But then if you go to the second piece, which is the goals, what are the actual measurable milestones to creating that vision? And then based on those two things, that actually dictates the business strategy. So there are many different ways that everybody listening knows you can grow businesses using a variety of different models, a variety of different tools, a variety of different strategies. But when you look at the shared strengths of an entrepreneur couple between the two of them and the shared benefit of actually working together with somebody who has those strengths, You can actually choose your strategy based on the strengths of the couple to get the highest leverage with the amount of time that you have. And then based on the strategy, that's when you divide up roles by those strengths to actually make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck.
Yeah. Plus, like, it's the ultimate form of accountability, and you're also not running 100%. It alone. So what's the weirdest thing you learned with working with couples during this process?
The weirdest thing?
Do you have one that comes to mind?
It's such a good question. I have one brewing. Do you have one that comes to mind?
Not yet, so go for it.
Okay. The weirdest thing is how it translates to male and female roles, I think, is the thing that we see, especially with very highly driven entrepreneurial women. There seems to be a conflict. And again, this isn't for all women, of course, but it's for many women that we've seen, where you have these very amazing powerhouse women who have two different desires that sometimes are at odds with each other. One desire is we want to grow, we want to build, we want to create. The other desire is I want my husband to step up a little. And I want him to like kind of do his thing. And I just want to be taken care of sometimes. So why I say that's weird is sometimes when we were coaching these couples through these dynamics, you have to speak to the part of them that is that powerhouse driven woman. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, while still finding balance and nuance and applying those dynamics in the relationship where they still want to be taken care of as a woman. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. That a lot. Yeah, we see it a lot.
You don't have a weird one, or?
I don't know yet.
I love it.
Come on, you only Kyle share. Come on.
There's got to be a weirder one.
I would just say in general, one thing that's really interesting about what it is that we get to do is getting to see the differences in personalities and how those come together in business as well as in the relationship. I was just going to say what's interesting is there's like the concept of opposites attract, and we see a lot where there's usually one person who's very organized, very detail oriented, and then there's another person and very analytical. Then there's another person who's very visionary, very big picture. And the way those two things come together, quite honestly, create like a superpower of a human. But usually instead of creating a superpower, it creates a lot of tension at first because their approaches to things are very different. And so getting to see how those things come together and can actually, like, if directed the right way, create the right outcome and the thing that they actually want. But if just directed slightly the wrong way, can create a lot of tension and friction sometimes. The thing to see,
Oh, yeah, the negativity side, yeah, I do the same thing when we do, like, DISC or we do analysis. Like, there's a part of the onboarding, it's not, I don't tell them it's DISC, but it's a secret question. And it reveals more about who that person is versus just, like, who their clients are. And it's the same analysis, right? It's, okay, this is why you're clashing. And you're right. Some people use that to their strength. Maybe they know they have the introspection, but I like those points because you're working with humans all day.
Yeah.
And that's the, there's the nuance.
I got one more weird
one. That's
one
fascinating.
That I think anybody listening who has ever coached or mentored other people could probably relate to. And we see it with couples. It's very bizarre that I come from a consulting background. So for almost 10 years, I was a digital marketing consultant. We've helped grow and scale companies by over $77 million. So what I'm used to doing is coaching high-level CEOs and consulting them. And they typically just do what we ask them to do. But moving into a coaching environment over the last couple of years, very different. And what we've noticed is that when we're coaching people, there are usually two types of people. One type of person is open and willing to receive that feedback and humble enough to act on it. And those are the ones that see amazing results. Those are the couples that do $100,000, $300,000, even $2 million months working with me and Ariel. But there are also a different part of the equation. There's a different type of person who, in the face of accountability, actually runs. So we have couples that like will grow really fast. And then because their identity doesn't speed up fast enough to get to the result, they self-sabotage and they actually start running the very thing that gave them success.
That's interesting that the identity doesn't catch up to the you have it. I just see it in retrospect for clients that are doing what I recommend 18 months later. But I never connected the dots that like, oh, maybe it's
I had this crazy idea that this other guy said, and you're like, oh yeah, I told you that 18 months ago.
That happened for marriage.
No, they're actually doing it. I'm like, oh,
absolutely.
And I guess like it makes sense for human nature. Like at first we don't like to hear how we're doing things wrong. There's probably an ego battle there, but still, it's just.
No, but I like how you. That's pretty fascinating. That's interesting. That brought up like another like a side question on that, but that's separate from the couplepreneurs. But when you're working with individuals, because this is all about human transformation, helping other people achieve their goals. How deep do you go to understand the way that their mind works, and then from there shaping their beliefs, behaviors, and environment?
I would say pretty deep. Obviously, we are not couples therapists, and we do not play them on TV. That's what we like to say. But with that said, there is a level of understanding that we have, not only because we've gone through a lot of these dynamics ourselves, But now after having thousands of conversations with different couples and coaching hundreds of them, that we've had the opportunity to see some of these interesting things at play that we can almost predict what's happening better than the people that are experiencing it can understand. So we're very blessed to have that like third party perspective. And one of the things that, just as an example of this, when we see a couple that they're really struggling to stay consistent with some form of habit, what we found, and you probably know this too, is there's this concept called the pain and pleasure principle, right? We're always, as humans, running away from pain or running towards pleasure. And specifically how this can show up in a kind of an interesting example is many years ago, I had in a separate business previously, I was struggling to be consistent. And I was struggling to be consistent with just these simple things that I knew I needed to do. And I hired a coach. And I remember on that first coaching session, he said to me, he's, okay, Ariel, what's the worst thing that would happen if you were successful? And I was like, that's an interesting question. It's a great question. But anyway, what kind of came out at that moment was if my business was successful, it would tank my relationship with Kyle, was what I said. And the coach at the time knew that was the real work, because the reason I wasn't essentially being consistent is I had unknowingly formed a belief in my mind that success in business was going to lead to division in relationships. And looking back on my history with that, I had parents that were entrepreneurial, multiple divorces, a lot of separation, a lot of fights. And so for me, I had formed this belief that business equaled division. And so I was applying that same thing to my relationship. I say this because anytime we see that there's a couple that's not growing the business like they want, or there's some tension in their relationship, we like to look at where is their pain being associated and how can we instead redirect that to something that's actually pleasurable, that's going to make them more motivated and actually give them the consistency in that to see the results.
Yeah, that's very real, especially like even creating safe problems for yourself, that like their inconsistency was a safe problem to addressing the bigger problem. That's fascinating. And sometimes I tell that to like their teammates or clients, like sometimes you just have to manipulate yourself and like your subconscious in a healthy way. I know it's a weird word. Obsession, manipulation, whatever. I don't care. You got to condition yourself to believe, because that's the subconscious side. That's fascinating. This has been a really fun conversation. Can't believe it's been like 30 minutes already. But let's dive into where can people go to one, thank you for being on, and two, learn more about what you're up to. Have you written a book? Do you write it like
absolutely. So the first place would be our Instagram. So our Instagram handle is @Couplepreneurs. And actually we have something that I think a lot of couples have gotten a lot of benefit out of. It's a quarterly goal planning template that couples can use together to plan goals for the business, but also personally. And so if you're interested in that, you could just DM us on Instagram, the word template, and we'll make sure that you get access to that. The second place is we have a Facebook group. We were in a position where we never saw a lot of other entrepreneurial couples, so we created a community of them. So it's called Successful Couples in Business. So that's our Facebook community. And then lastly, we do have a podcast. Our podcast is called The Couplepreneurs Show, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify.
That's awesome. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Before you leave, any latest fun, crazy date nights?
I have one. One time I surprised Kyle with taking him to a rage room. That was a good time.
Have you ever done that, Raul?
So
a rage room?
I have not been surprised to be taken to a rage room.
So a rage room is, for anybody who doesn't know, it's a room that you get a bunch of stuff that you get to smash and throw things against the wall and basically just let out a bunch of anger, which we don't really have a lot of anger.
I was like, did you think I was angry or something? I guess I needed to get some rage out.
But it just looked like a good time and really unique. And it was fun. I will say throwing pottery against the wall was very like
cathartic in a way.
It was cathartic, but at first I was so conditioned to not do it that it took a little bit to get over that, but it ended up being a really good plan.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Sure. Yeah, I call that my spot rack. I love it. At my gym.
Your spot rack is your rage room. I get it.
Oh, that's awesome. We all need that. No, thank you for being. I'll put those links in the show notes.
Awesome.
And,
thank you, Raul.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get more of these podcasts, please go ahead and subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to the pod. If you have any suggestions or questions that you want me to answer on the pod, or you have a guest that you want me to interview, please go ahead and email me all of your suggestions and questions at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. If you'd like to give me public feedback, you can go on Apple Podcasts, and from there you can leave up to a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like more free resources where you can get my best strategies to help you increase your company's performance and scale profitably, you can get handpicked articles to propel your growth, and you can get trainings and discussions that I give freely online, as well as low-cost resources such as my books and guides. You can get all of that by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. 90% of all of these resources are not behind any email opt-ins. So you can get instant access by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. Now, if you'd like to accelerate your progress and shorten the gap between information and action and start seeing results in your business, let's work together to increase your company's performance and scale profitably and serve more clients without the overwhelm. You can request a free clarity call to see how we can best support you to reach your goals by going to dogoodwork.io/apply. Again, that's dogoodwork.io/apply. As always, it's an honor to be a small part in your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.